in this bill, none of the money obtained through this bill is going to be used for smoking cessation.
That is not covered in this bill. Correct.
On the bill, Mr. Speaker, the other evening we had a gentleman, Mr. Lesser, come and testify on behalf of the cigarette wholesalers. And he had a very, very deep concern about hijacking of cigarettes. It just so happens today that very same Mr. Lesser had $50,000 worth of cigarettes hijacked in Newton, New Jersey. So I think that there is already a thought process in the state that these are going to become an extremely valuable commodity, and I just hope that we do not see an additional streak of these kinds of robberies and hijackings. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I may, questions for the sponsor, please.
Will the sponsor yield to questions?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assemblywoman, if you could please explain your prime motivation for sponsoring this bill, please.
I think I explained my prime motivation for sponsoring this bill a little bit earlier. I believe that this bill will help keep kids away from getting started smoking cigarettes.
Through the Speaker, are there currently laws in New Jersey regarding the age before you can smoke?
Yes, there are. But there are also laws against hijacking and robbing people and things of that nature.
Through the Speaker, have you considered proposing legislation, since you feel so strongly on the issue about children smoking, of possibly stiffening penalties for those who sell or transfer cigarettes to youth?
That is not covered in this bill, and if you feel that we should do that, I will certainly research it, and perhaps you and I can co-sponsor such a bill.
Through the Speaker, do you think that I guess this is the third sales tax we're going to see?
Yes, and I sponsored the first two also.
Yes. Do you believe it's had any adverse consequences on the economy in the state of New Jersey?
No, I do not. I believe that whatever perceived loss we have in the sales of cigarettes in the state of New Jersey, we've more than made up in increased health for some of our citizens.
Through the Speaker, are you aware that there's been studies done regarding the effect on convenience stores, and these studies have shown that the average convenience store in the state of New Jersey has lost approximately $39,000 in profit due to diverted sales on the Internet, other states, Indian reservations, mail houses?
We have addressed in other bills, in fact, a bill that was passed by this House a couple of weeks ago, addressed the Internet sales of cigarettes, and I hope that is something when that bill, if the bill goes through the Senate and is signed by the governor, we will see a clampdown on that. It is illegal. People underage are buying cigarettes that way, and that's what the prior bill was. I prime sponsored it. It did go through this House with bipartisan support, and I think we're making steps.
Through the Speaker, would you want to clamp down on commuters, say they travel to Philadelphia or New York and they buy their cigarettes? Would you want to clamp down on them as well?
No, but it is illegal to bring into the state more than a certain amount of cigarettes, from what I understand the law to be. But for those who go to Pennsylvania, maybe, where I live, Assemblyman, we're about 15 minutes from Manhattan. Our tax is 60 cents a pack with this increased tax. Will be 60 cents a pack less than New York. So maybe we'll make it up by New Yorkers coming over to Fort Lee and Englewood and Teaneck to buy cigarettes.
Through the Speaker, do you have any feelings on this $39,000 figure that convenience stores are seeing in lost sales? Would that affect the business? Could you consider that?
I have not seen those studies, and I'd be happy to look at them.
Through the Speaker, have you considered, it seems to me that you would like it both ways. You want to bash these cigarettes, and that's fine, but you also want the cash as well, sort of a cash cow that you're milking. Have you considered outlawing cigarettes since they're so bad?
Assemblyman, this bill before us is talking about increasing the taxes on cigarettes. A study was released a couple of weeks ago, I believe done in England, I think it was in England, a 50-year study on what happens to smokers and how many years they lose of their lives and how much it costs us in health care. We are not talking about banning cigarettes in this bill. We are talking about raising the taxes 35 cents.
Okay. Well, thank you, Assemblywoman.
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Speaker, may I make a brief comment on the bill?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reason I'm going to oppose this legislation is that, obviously, I oppose any new taxes, but most importantly because I think it has a really adverse consequence on people who are running businesses in the state of New Jersey. And all of my colleagues have talked about diverted sales, lost sales in the state of New Jersey. For convenience stores, mom and pop shops, to experience $39,000 in lost profits, often that's what's keeping them in business. And I think that's something that's not being considered as we confront this bill today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Panaccio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Briefly on the bill, if I may.
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, this tax is purported to raise $100 million on a budget that's well over $28 billion. Here's a novel idea. Instead of increasing spending by 17%, why don't we just increase spending by 16.5%? That 0.5% will raise $140 million. Not only don't you need this tax, but we can eliminate the previous tax that we spoke about. Mr. Speaker, it's not that we're not taxed enough. It's just that this state spends too much. This state needs a fiscal diet, and it needs it now.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Munoz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak on the bill.
On the bill.
With the permission of the Speaker, I'd like to compliment the sponsor. I know she's, very interested in smoking cessation. And I simply want to talk, and a doctor would have to be crazy to be opposed to stopping smoking. I mean, it's obviously very bad for you. My concern with this is the fiscal consequences. And as I said before, in the last 2 years, we will increase taxes roughly about $1 a pack in New Jersey. And New Jersey is a fairly small state, and I'll go back to the New York experience. What people are noticing is if they increase taxes a lot fast, what happens is behavior changes, and that behavior is people go to places, people stop smoking, people do this, that, or the other thing. So I think that my concern is that it won't raise as much money as we think it will. Otherwise, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Ms. Sponsor.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Keene.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I wanted to also salute the sponsor of the bill. I served last year on the Health Committee when Chairwoman Weinberg was taking up a smoking issue regarding smoking in bars and restaurants. At that time, just briefly on this subject, I did not support it, but I do know your devotion to the issue, and I really believe your intentions are good with this. At that time, I didn't think it was a good idea, but I hate smoking, I have to tell you. And I have reevaluated my position since last year. Maybe I'm just spending a lot of time in restaurants and bars, I don't know. But since last year I've come around, and I don't think I want it to be in bars anymore. I have to tell you, though, I do smoke an occasional cigar. And I know a guy who owns a cigar shop in my district. And sometimes when we're debating some of these issues like cosmetic surgery and some of the other bills, you're really depending on what staff tells you and you're depending on what's in the bill comments. I have a whole chart here about smoking and how the number of the revenue is going down, but I should say the number of the number of packs are going down, but the tax is pretty much stable because the tax has risen while the number of packs go down. So basically, we are getting in more revenue based on the charts that we read. But I have to tell you, when you're out there talking to the guy who owns the cigar shop or talking to the people that smoke, it's palpable. You just go across the river into Pennsylvania on the other side of the bridge over here, and they just back up with New Jersey license plates, and they load up the trunks, and they drive back, and they do it every day. So, I don't like little kids smoking either, but I think based on the financial consequence this bill will have on New Jersey businesses. One of the convenience food store chains in South Jersey said they were losing $400,000 a week in revenue. And I believe that because I see what it does to some of the stores in my district. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Madam Clerk, open the machine for a vote. All recorded who wish to be recorded. Properly recorded. Madam Clerk, close the machine and take a tally.
Mr. Speaker, Assembly Bill 3113 has received 43 votes in the affirmative, 36 votes in the negative, and no abstentions.
Assembly Bill 3113. Having received 43 votes in the affirmative, 36 votes in the negative, and no abstention, I declare the bill passed. Let the bill take the usual course to pass bill. Bill on the clerk's desk.
On third reading and final passage, Assembly Bill number 3127, sponsored by Assemblyman Dignan, establishes annual assessment on gross receipts of certain licensed ambulatory care facilities and requires licensure of certain health care services.
Assemblyman Dignan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please move the bill.
Assemblyman Dignan moves the bill. Madam Clerk, open the machine for a vote. All recorded wish to be recorded. Properly recorded. Madam Clerk, close the machine and take a tally.
Mr. Speaker, Assembly Bill 3127 has received 43 votes in the affirmative, 33 votes in the negative, and 2 abstentions.
Assembly Bill 3127, having received 43 votes in the affirmative, 33 votes in the negative, and 2 abstentions, I declare the bill passed. Let the bill take the usual course to pass bill. Bill on the clerk's desk.
Motion by Assemblyman Cryan, resolved that pursuant to Rule 15:20, Senate Bill number 1701 be substituted for Assembly Bill number 99, with which it is identical, and that Assemblyman Cryan and Roberts be joined as co-prime sponsors of Senate Bill 1701.
Assemblyman Cryan.
Mr. Speaker, I move the substitution.
All those in favor of move the substitution signify by saying aye. All opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Assemblyman Baroni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Excuse me. Let him move the bill first. Assemblyman Cryan, would you move the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the bill.
Assemblyman Cryan moves the bill. Assemblyman Baroni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this year, when the first idea to cap spending on the bill, Mr. Speaker,
On the bill.
the idea came to cap the expenditures of school districts. The reason was given as, well, property taxes in New Jersey, the highest in the country. They are sending people out of the state, which they are. Which are sending our seniors, which they are. So the answer was, let's cap the spending of schools. Essentially, let us blame our schools, cap their budgets, cap their surplus, and that will solve the problem. Look, I'm new here, but I got to tell you, something this dramatic and something this important, something like this that will fundamentally change public education in New Jersey, I'd like to see some evidence. Call me crazy. You know, I met with my school boards on this, my school districts, and I said, you're big spenders, they said. You waste taxpayer money, they say. You don't pay attention to your taxpayers, they say. And then they point out the hours and hours and hours and days that they spend paring down their budgets. See, what we have here is a proposal to freeze our school districts, but in reality, it's because, we say because property taxes are so high, and that's true, but why are they so high? Could it possibly be that we froze the funds to our non-avid public schools for 2 years in a row? So for 2 years in a row, these districts like I represent had to raise property taxes, and now we say property taxes are too high. Maybe had we actually funded school districts like South Brunswick, school districts like Hamilton,
actually funded them at the formula that our predecessors in this chamber said we should fund them at, we wouldn't have such crises in property taxes. But the proposal is for caps. Now, it sounds very good. I am sure if we had a focus group and we said we're going to put caps on all those administrative expenses, all those high spendings, it'd probably sound pretty good. But let me tell you a story about a school district that lived through what many school districts are about to live through if this passes. It's one of my towns, the town of Jamesburg. The town of Jamesburg, like most other communities in our state, had their aid frozen for 2 years. The population going up, the aid not going up, property taxes going up. The school district, whose superintendent is also a principal, whose assistant superintendent is also a principal. 2 schools in the whole district. They put money in their small surplus account to be able to cover special education children who may move into the borough of Jamesburg. Last year, because of the increased number of students and the increased number of special education students, the school district faced a crisis in the middle of the year. In the middle of the school year, the school district was at cap. They had nowhere else to go. Had gone through their surplus, had nowhere else to go. You know what they did? They did what each and every one of our districts are going to be faced to do. In the middle of the school year, they laid off 4 teachers. Right out of the classroom. Elementary school students who were used to one teacher, having the teacher removed. They locked the school library because they had to remove the librarian, put her in the classroom. They had no music programs, no art programs, no after-school programs. This is a real situation. This proposal isn't going to sound good in a focus group. This proposal is going to lay off teachers. This proposal is going to hurt our school kids. There is no evidence to say that lots and lots of school districts in our state are spending crazily. Show us the evidence. This is a solution to the problem we haven't defined. This is a solution to the problem that will do nothing but hurt our kids. We have 2 options. These to help properties, these caps would actually do what we've said for 20 years we should do, which is fully fund CEFA, which is to fund special education. We want to lower property taxes in towns like mine and towns like most of us in this room. Actually fund education the way we say we're going to do it. And if we really want to support education, let's stop using our schools as the whipping boys for the problems in New Jersey. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman Gregg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
On the bill.
I looked at the title of this bill when it came out, and it said caps, restricting spending. Could be good for people. Historically, Assemblyman Gregg is a fairly fiscal conservative kind of guy. There would be people who would say, gee, Guy, you ought to be really in favor of these caps. It ought to make sense to you. But I had to go a little deeper, but not very much deeper, to realize that this is just about a dictate, as Assemblyman Barone said, to one segment, to the school board at our local areas, in our towns, folks that have no real control. Caps can be a good idea. In fact, quite frankly, I have constitutional resolutions to do caps for real property tax relief, which this isn't. And what's the difference between those and what we're doing today? One, I took some time to visit some of the towns to find out what might be a reasonable and acceptable cap that they could live under. Mostly 2, mine also deals with the other entity called us. I find it incredible that we would even look at a bill like this today that is going to tell school districts that they will have to live within a cap that is smaller than the standard of living, while the state of New Jersey is raising its budget 17% on the same day. I can't believe it. The state spending is exploding while we have the unmitigated gall to tell our school districts to stay within this tiny cap without even talking to them to find out if they could possibly stay within that cap. What's the third difference between what I might propose is that when we cap this ridiculous state spending, that we could send it back to the municipalities and to the school districts for meaningful property tax relief, not a mandate to a town that is already struggling, as Assemblyman Baroni has so articulately said. A budget that will have such minimum support for its suburban districts, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and at the same time we're slapping them in the face and saying, you can only spend this much. We're not sitting there saying you've made a mistake and you've spent too much here.
At this moment, we are discussing the instant bill before us, and I'd appreciate it if you'd ask the Assemblyman to stay on it.
Mr. Speaker, there's no need.
Okay.
I'd already left that part of my discussion anyway, and I appreciate the latitude that you gave me throughout. We are still today in this bill asking our local school boards to live within a cap, while on the same day, on ourselves, we're imposing no cap. And that's what the folks are going to remember tomorrow, when they wake up and they find that we are so omnipotent up here to tell them how in each one of those 566 school municipalities and 600 plus school districts that we know better, and we can tell you how much you can spend while they look up on high and say, you have raised your budget 17%. It is totally hypocritical for us to do both of these bills on the same day. So I hope all of you, when you press your buttons today, you think of your 566 municipalities, of which all of us represent many of them, and think about what you're going to tell them when they come back to you and say, I have to lay off that art teacher, I have to end that music program, I can't fix my leaking roof, I got 3 special ed kids, what does that mean in my cap? I missed the administrative budget line by $4, what does that do to me? Well, you will have to answer those questions while they look at the bloated budget that we have promulgated today on the same day.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
On the bill.
Well, there's little question that there are 30 districts in the state which get about 50% of the state aid that will not be required to live within any of these caps that we're imposing today. There's a certain court that would see to that. I think that if we enact these bills to give the voters the impression that we're doing something here to hold their property taxes down, we are merely creating a farce. Thus, we have caps in place today. Again, the caps in existence prior to the enactment of this law is a 3% cap on school districts or the price index. On local governments, we have a 5% cap, which is being lowered. With these 2 caps in place, 5% on local government spending, 3% on school spending, we've seen over the last 2 years the average increase in property tax statewide was 7%. If the average was that, then obviously in many localities the actual increases both of these years was far in excess of that. And if we view the success that these caps had in the past in holding property taxes down, I can see little hope that enacting this will do anything significantly different. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Holstoffel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I'm a 10th District Shore Area legislator.
And over the last number of years, as with many of my colleagues here, we've watched as school funding has been cut to our districts. Now we have a bill in front of us, which quite honestly, we've gone through a number of the bills on the list today. This is probably the biggest joke of them all. That we're going to turn around and tell the schools that are receiving hundreds and hundreds of new students every year, fastest growing portion of the state, that they're going to have to cut and do with less, while we're going to, at the same time, take the districts where, the 30-odd districts where the money that is there and available, as I understand it from speaking with people in the field, the administrative costs run in double digits. We're not going to talk to them about it. And finally, as my colleague from Sussex County said, we're going to turn around and pass a budget for 17% at the state level, yet cap the school systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Malone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I, too, rise to strenuously oppose this piece of legislation. I happen to have approximately 31 years in education. I've seen firsthand what this kind of legislation could potentially do. I don't think it's been well reasoned out. And here are just some of the concerns that I think people better seriously think about before they vote yes on this piece of legislation. We all know about the special education costs and what happens to school districts when you have someone come in during the middle of the year that was not anticipated. We have had as high as $100,000 a year placements for kids with multiple special needs that have devastated smaller school budgets. We've had situations where districts that are getting federal impact aid have contacted me that we may lose federal impact aid because of the budget and the surplus caps. I will get to sponsor additional information if he so chooses on this, but there is a serious concern that it was raised to me by a superintendent. Many of the situations that come up during the year, whether it's increased utility costs, whether it's increased state mandates, and we're all good at putting additional state mandates on, with really no significant increase in funding. We call it something else, but we really do that to the school districts. Unanticipated legal contingencies that come up every year, and more so as we get into a more lawsuit-conscious society. Delays in anticipated local and state aid payments. We all know that has happened. And what were school districts asked to do last year? Utilize their surplus to get them over that time period. Unanticipated enrollment increases. As Assemblyman Holzapfel said, our part of the state increases not by 100 or 200 students a year, but 500 or 600 students a year. Anticipating that and just anticipating the needs of those students from a whole cadre of reasons and problems is almost impossible to do. So if people in this room think that they're going to lower property taxes by doing this cap, if people think that this is the way to go, please vote for it, because the repercussions of damaging and wreaking havoc on schools and school children will come back to you tenfold. I warn you, this is not something that has been well thought out. We're in the process with the Commissioner of Education of redoing the evaluation process for school districts. This thing is being rushed through. It should be done in a thoughtful manner. I don't think anybody criticizes an attempt to streamline and curb spending. But I think it's foolhardy to think that this piece of legislation is going to do anything but harm school districts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Crine.
Please, thank you for the opportunity. I do want to correct Assemblyman Malone on one point. I won't debate them all. There is no impact on the federal aid. We've had that checked through OLS. We have an opinion on it. There will not be. Let's not raise that concern. It's simply not accurate. I won't debate all the other stuff at this point, but I do want to make sure that my colleagues are aware of that particular point.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Panaccio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, briefly on the bill. I think this bill, quite frankly, is disingenuous to the kids of our state. We're asking school districts to spend down their surpluses, keeping in mind, since the governor introduced his budget just a few short months ago, the state has actually increased the numbers in its budget prediction, in its surplus prediction, and now we're asking the individual school districts to do just the opposite. Mr. Speaker, we should lead by example. We should do that as legislators, as a legislative body. Quite frankly, we're not doing that. We are raising the state budget by 17%, or well over $4 billion this year, Mr. Speaker, and that is on the bill. That is very important, and it's so very, very, very disingenuous of us. We don't want to use the word hypocritical, but it's so very, very disingenuous of us to tell school districts to cap their spending at 2.5% while we gorge ourselves at 17%. This is a do as I say, not as I do, Bill. It's wrong, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that this bill is well-intentioned in its purpose, but unfortunately it falls into that classic mode of one-size-fits-all government. It places totally unrealistic burdens on school systems. And really, when you think about it, as it's been pointed out, just a couple of special ed kids coming into a small district will just blow the guts out of any cap system that exists. But the real rub, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Speaker, is the state's own conduct. The very same state that's ordering these caps for towns and schools, as Assemblyman Panaccio has pointed out, is increasing its own spending at the same time, in fact, on the same day, by 17%. 17%. Yes, 17%. Assemblyman Panaccio wouldn't say it, Mr. Speaker, but I will. What hypocrisy. What nerve. What presumption. What right do we do this to school systems when we're not willing to live by the same set of rules? It's time for this legislation to get real, Mr. Speaker. When the state fixes its own sins, only then will it have the standing to suggest to others how they can improve their operations. Until then, we should leave schools to manage their own affairs. Frankly, they're doing a better job than we are. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill?
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, like you, my professional background is in education. I spent 3 years at the University of Delaware, and I spent 35 years at Ocean County College. So it is not at elementary or secondary education. In 1976, I was 33 years old. I was appointed to the council in my town. Several years after that, I was a council member when the local assembly, the two assemblymen from my district came before the Brick Township Council and explained to us the cap bill. That was going to benefit not only the municipality but also the state. And 2 years later, I saw the municipal budget skyrocket, and I saw the municipal skyrocket in Ocean County and throughout the state skyrocket simply because of the cap with very few exceptions. 2 months ago, I attended a statewide meeting of the Principal and Supervisors Association in Atlantic City. And I was on a panel with Chairman Stanley, Chairman Greenwald, and Majority Leader Roberts. And one of the questions that was repeatedly asked was about the caps. And the four of us agreed there should be some type of caps. But I believe, and I don't see the other people here who are in that room. I don't see Stanley or Greenwald or even Robert. Maybe Greenwald is here. But I think we all said perhaps they didn't need to be so drastic as those that have been proposed. Other speakers have talked about 2.5%, which is down from the previous percent or 2%, the 17% of our increase. Mr. Speaker, before the redistricting occurred 2 years ago, I represented Belmar and South Belmar. South Belmar does not have a public school. They send your school children to Belmar, which has K through 8. The town of South Belmar and the school district of South Belmar could not pay for the family that moved to them into that town in a winter rental from New York City who had 4 children who required special education. They did not have the money. There was no cap. They simply did not have the money because they did not anticipate when their budget was prepared that 4 kids are going to move in from New York City that were going to require special ed. It took special legislation that my Democratic colleagues supported to provide money for South Belmar to get money to pay to Belmar to educate those special ed kids. This cap is not necessary. The amount is devastating. It's going to be wonderful. You can go out tomorrow and say, hey, look what we did, folks. We got a cap. We're going to control education. Baloney. There's going to be a school election next year. There's going to be a municipal election. There's going to be a statewide election. And I guarantee taxes are going to go up next year. And who are we going to put the finger at? We're going to point it at the local boards. We're going to point it at the council. Are the people going to look at the legislature who did not have the guts to not only have a cap on themselves, but simply chose to pawn it off on the people who really had the least amount to do with it? We have educators at the balcony. They have contracts, most of them in excess of 2% a year. They have hospitalization, most of it in excess of 2% a year. I represent, and you represent districts with new kids moving into those districts. We've got the special ed crisis. How in God's name can you expect statewide the school districts or non-habit districts to live within a 2% cap? And if you vote for it tonight, you're going to rue the day.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Rooney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I should have made a tape on my comments on the municipal caps, and I could have played it back on the comments on this because they're virtually the same. Unless we plan to include a cap on salaries for teachers at 2.5% or health cost increase at 2.5%, and we know in my district, the salaries in my school district in Northville, salaries have gone up an average of 4.5% on teacher salaries. As far as the state health benefit plan, we all know that that's gone up in the last 3 years. It's gone up 50%, 50%. And we're asking the school boards and the municipalities to take a 2.5% cap. We know what it's all about. It gives the opposition party, our opponents here, the Democrats, the ability to go out next year and say, we put a 2.5% cap on municipalities. We put a 2.5% on school boards, and to say that, really, we tried to control your property taxes, and it's all their fault. Well, it's not their fault, Mr. Speaker. It's our fault. Because if we can't control the spending, if we can't give aid to those municipalities, and I'm not talking about the 30 municipalities that are mainly in Democrat districts, I'm talking about the municipalities of my district and most of the people on our side of the aisle, because we've gotten less aid from the state. We've having frozen aid, so I don't know, it's Kool-Aid, I guess, from the state in the last few years that the Democrats have been in power. This is what's happening. We are losing the battle at the local level, and yes, we are proposing 17%. I even heard as high as 19% in the budget, yet I haven't seen the comments as to what the actual number is. We don't set a good example for the rest of the state, Mr. Speaker. And for us to come here and say that we're doing this to help the property taxpayer, it's hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker. This is wrong. It's a scam. I can't support it, and I will never support this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Blee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I find that it is ironic that we should consider this legislation this evening when later on this evening, or probably 1 minute after midnight, we will vote on a budget that's in around the 17% range, while right now we're voting on limiting school districts to around 2.5%. And I know it's been a long day, and it'll continue to be a long evening with an awful lot of rhetoric. But I think you know me by now, Mr. Speaker. I try and stay away from the rhetoric and stick to the point. If you look at what this legislation does, first of all, we have to put it in perspective. And we know for a fact that school aid has been essentially frozen for 3 years, which means we're way behind on CFA funding. So one of the unintended consequences of this legislation, if enacted this evening, is if the skies opened up tomorrow and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars fell out onto us, and we decided that we were going to fully fund CEFA, this legislation would prevent that money from ever getting to the classroom. And to cap spending sounds politically correct, and it's something that you can go back to your district and say we were fiscally responsible. But the unintended consequence of this action that this body will take tonight will actually be a cruel hoax, in that if the dollars were available tomorrow to fully fund our formula, we would not be permitted to spend them on the children, and I think that's really a travesty. The other aspect of the bill, Mr. Speaker, is that we have not considered really what I would call a tale of two cities. In my district on one end, and I know you heard from Ocean County and Burlington, we have growth districts. We have growth that's mandated by the Pinelands. And in our towns, particularly Egg Harbor Township, Galloway Township, Hamilton Township, our student population has been rising by around 500 students per year for a number of years. This does not take into consideration enrollment growth. So again, as mandates dictate to these school districts that they must accept all this growth, one, we are not giving them the funding they deserve, and two, if the funding were there, these caps would prohibit them from getting the money to the classroom, getting them to the students. At the other end of the tale of two cities, we represent very tiny cities. We have a city right now, Corbin City, which is about a population of 400, approximately 100 students, and it's a sending district only, so they can only write the check for tuition. This past year, they've had an influx of special education students, and if you can believe it, their tax increase this year because of school taxes is around 92 cents. And this bill does nothing to address that. And furthermore, if somehow we're saying that they have to limit the 92 cents to 2.5 cents to accommodate special ed, what happens to the rest of the budget? Where do they go? Where do they cut? So, as well-intentioned or as politically correct as it sounds to cap spending, I believe that this will have a disastrous effect on our school districts and our school budgets. So I would urge all my colleagues, forget the rhetoric, forget the sound bites. If you really evaluate this legislation on the merits, it's not good for the schools of New Jersey. It's not good for the children of New Jersey. And I would urge all my colleagues to vote in opposition. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman Cryan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to, in fact, echo Assemblyman Blee to some respect, because I would say, forget the rhetoric you just heard and the hyperbole you just heard, and why don't we just talk a little bit about some facts as to where we stand with this bill. My colleagues seem to feel as if caps are something new, when they are the ones, in fact, who invented them in the 90s. Wonderful situation. Everything you refer to has a cap at some point, and there are exceptions. Special ed has an exception in the cap. Higher enrollment is an exception in the cap. Capital outlays, insurance. Of course, you all know that because some of you actually were here when they were created. So you don't need me to remind you. Just back here in facts, those exceptions still exist. The hyperbole I heard simply was inaccurate. We'll talk often today. I suppose we'll hear numbers of 17, 19, whatever fantasy number we'll hear in just a few minutes. In administration costs in this budget that we're dealing with, a budget with more than half going back to the taxpayers of this state, half or more, perhaps as much as 70%. The reality is administration costs in this budget are down with one exception. And I proudly admit that I support this exception that saves children's lives. That's not hyperbole. We all know that's fact. So let's knock it off with the idea that we can have it both ways. We're fiscally conservative, but we don't like caps. Caps are bad, but we invented them. Everything is said, everything is bad when the camera's on, but in fact, this is a good bill. And let's go over what the bill does. This bill takes caps and it says you can't have a 3% cap, it's 2.5% or CPI, whichever is greater. I heard inflation a few moments ago. Inflation is accounted in here. This is a smart bill because it deals with the number one crisis in the state of New Jersey, property tax reform. Let's not forget what this does. Along with municipal caps, along with a citizens convention, this puts us on the road, is part of the bridge that gets us to the most important issue, dealing with it, finally, for once, in the state of New Jersey, property tax reform. Vote the way you want today. Vote whatever way is most politically expedient, because the talk certainly was. But the reality is this is part of the process as we continue to deal with the most important issue in the state of New Jersey, property tax reform. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Madam Clerk, please open the machine for a vote. All recorded who wish to be recorded, properly recorded. Madam Clerk, please close the machine and take a tally.
Mr. Speaker, Senate Bill 1701 has received 43 votes in the affirmative, 34 votes in the negative, and no abstentions.
Senate Bill 1701 having received 43 votes in the affirmative, 34 votes in the negative, and no abstention, I declare the bill passed. Let the bill take the usual route of passed bills. You all right? Members, we're going to take a break, and we're going to promptly be back around 10:15. So we can all have a pizza.
Bill number 967, sponsored by Senators James and Cunningham, clarifies mayor's authority to determine conditions of transfer, exchange, lease, acquisition, and sale of real property in certain cities.
Assemblyman Payne.
Mr. Speaker, move the bill, please. Thank you.
Assemblyman Payne moves the bill. Madam Clerk, Assemblyman Thompson.
On the bill, Mr. Speaker.
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, there's been attempts to bring forward bills related to dual office holding. If ever there was a classical case here of dual office holding and conflict of interest, it has to be this bill. This bill is sponsored by a dual office holder, and it pertains to only one individual.
Assemblyman Thompson, you got to stay on the bill.
I am on the bill.
No, you're on dual office holding.
I'm speaking of the sponsor of this bill. This
Stay
bill
on the bill,
only
please.
serves as sponsor. It
Yeah,
only
but
serves as
this
sponsor.
is on the bill, not on dual job office holding.
Okay. Again, it is a case of a bill being put in for an individual that will only affect that individual and only increase that individual's power. I think it is absolutely wrong.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Madam Clerk, open the machine for a vote. Don't get excited, guys. Take it easy. All recorded, wish to be recorded. Properly recorded. Madam Clerk, close the machine and take a tally.
Mr. Speaker, Senate Bill 967 has received 42 votes in the affirmative, 32 votes in the negative, and 3 abstentions.
Point of order. Yeah.
We have a quorum call.
Bill?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Senate Bill 967, having received 42 votes in the affirmative, 32 votes in the negative, and 3 abstentions, I declare the bill passed. Let the bill take the usual course of pass bills. Now, Minority Leader, you want a quorum call?
Quorum call, please.
Okay. We have a quorum call. Oh. You mean to tell me that over here that doesn't happen?
I didn't see it. I saw it on your
You
side.
didn't see it? So if I
No.
catch anybody voting for another member, it's all right for me to point it out to you?
Yes.
You sure you want me to do that?
Mr. Speaker, all I want is a proper quorum. I don't care.
Okay, thank
Thanks.
you. Madam Clerk, close the machine, take a tally.
Mr. Speaker, there are 79 members present. You have a quorum.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Bill on the clerk's desk.
On third reading and final passage, Assembly Bill number 3100, sponsored by Assemblyman Greenwald and Payne, appropriates $28,027,261,000 in state funds and $9,151,273 in federal funds for the state budget for fiscal year 2004-2005.
Assemblyman Greenwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 2 years of exercising unprecedented fiscal restraint and amid enormous economic uncertainty, I am proud to present this state with a budget that delivers the dividends of an improving economy to the people of this state. Mr. Speaker, this Appropriations Act is the product of nearly 4 months' worth of work. The process that brought us to this juncture began with a series of public hearings where people from all corners of this state expressed a collective desire for this legislature to do more to help New Jersey's families. It continued with reviews of state agencies' operations, continuous re-examinations of revenue collections and projections, and negotiations over what spending priorities we should make for the next 12 months. This budget is the result of that work. There are many people who deserve to be mentioned for contributing to this effort, but none more than the staff that were with us day in and day out. On our side, Mary Messenger, who has been doing this and has an historic knowledge of the budget and our state's spending and our state's budgets, far greater than many of us who have ever served. Andrew Hendries, whose experience in education funding and children's needs has been a tremendous asset. As well as from the Republican staff, Beth Schermerhorn and Christine Pastor, who have been strong advocates and strong aides to their members dealing with the revenues and the projections, interfacing with the different departments, as well as David Rosen in his first year heading this office for OLS and this tremendous project that so many of us participate in. I also want to thank my distinguished colleagues on the Assembly Budget Committee. Vice Chairman William Payne, who led a cause for over a year to understand the need for a cancer center in Newark, similar to the one in New Brunswick and one last year recognized finally in South Jersey. Assemblywoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman for her advocacy for the children of DYFS. Assemblyman Joe Cryan, as he asked constantly to remember the business people, the little people, the people that work day in and day out. Assemblywoman Joan Quigley, who stood for us to help us understand the needs of health care and hospitals. Assemblywoman Linda Greenstein, who talked to us about communities, about schools, and about local government. And Assemblyman Joe Vaz, a new member to the committee, who stood by and watched, learned, and added his insight as an executive at the local branch and his ability to achieve success by doing more with less. I also want to recognize the contributions and work of our Republican colleagues on the committee. My friend Joe Malone, a tireless advocate for education. Assemblyman Kevin O'Toole, who has been able to mix the needs of urban life as well as that of small suburban communities. Assemblyman Frank Lee, a strong and vocal advocate for one of the leading industries in our states, casino gambling, as well as the voice of South Jersey, and another new member, Assemblywoman Allison McCose, who, while she may be new to government, has watched and learned well from her father and served during a difficult time as she watched her husband leave to defend our country. Mr. Speaker, when I began reading the newspapers this morning, you can imagine that I wasn't quite sure that I had awoken in the state of New Jersey. I was reading articles describing cataclysmic events which had apparently occurred over the past few days and would affect us for years to come. Members of this House used words like shocking and appalling. We heard them again tonight. These were words being used to describe the fiscal year 2005 budget. Mr. Speaker, as you can imagine, I was quite surprised by the terminology. As chairman of this committee, I was sure that I am more well-versed in the details of the budget than most, but reading these articles made me doubt that. Shocking, appalling. They stuck with me. They hung with me all day. Because it is for sure shocking that over 1/2 of every dollar spent in this state is for property tax relief. It is shocking that the homestead rebates, direct property tax relief, for over 3 million senior citizens, middle-class homeowners, tenants, and young families will total over $1.5 billion. It is appalling that over $500 million will ensure hospital care for 1.4 million working poor, working families every day who go to work and struggle to fight for the needs of their families but have no health coverage, and our hospitals have stood by them, and we will stand by them as well. It is shocking that this same funding will keep hospitals, one of our state's largest employment sectors, afloat, the second largest employer in this state. Shocking as we hear this legislature is against business, against opportunity. Yet in the times of the worst economic crisis in this state since the Great Depression, we did something that has never been done, and we have fully funded the needs of our hospitals and fully funded charity care, something that people said we would never be able to achieve. Are we appalled that this budget, for the first time in anyone's memory, provides the resources needed to keep our children safe? We're shocked that neglected and abused children finally have a budget that puts them first and ends the nightmare of abuse and tragedy that they've known for too long. Is it shocking that $39 million will be spent to keep families living with cancer close to home, receiving world-class treatment, and benefiting from the Cancer Institute of New Jersey's world-class research, expanding its horizons now beyond New Brunswick to finally fulfill its mission of being a world-class statewide facility? Is it shocking that despite the federal government's failure to give New Jersey taxpayers their fair share, this budget increases funding to care for nursing home clients? Is it shocking that our community providers and their dedicated staffs, those who testified before our committee, those who sat on both sides of this aisle, those of you who sent me letter after letter saying we must fund the COLA increases, is it shocking and amazing that nearly $100 million in costs of living adjustments have been provided for these people who take care of our loved ones who can no longer take care of themselves? Is it appalling that this budget makes a college education more accessible and more affordable for New Jersey students? Is it the Speaker's New Jersey STARS program that guarantees a community college education to every student wherever they go to school in the top 20% of their class? Is it shocking that we would dedicate $10 million of new money to a program to give our children hope and an education? Is it the increased tuition aid assistance with the increased educational opportunity funds? Is it shocking that finally, last year for the first time and again this year, the state will provide special education funding to the children of this state so that property taxes will not go up, so that neighbors will not be pitted against neighbor, so that grandparent will not be pitted against child? Perhaps it's the rental assistance for the neediest among us, when the federal government has reduced its commitment to funding Section 8 housing. This state has put, for the first time ever, $10 million into this program. What about that shocks the conscience? Why should home ownership, why should the pride and dignity that everyone in this house has known, that I knew when I carried my wife across the threshold of our new home, when I carried my babies when they were born back to their cribs, why should the people who have no opportunity other than that Section 8 housing, why should we be shocked and amazed by that? Is it shocking that our state's veteran homes will open new beds for the brave men and women who serve our country so well? Are we appalled by the prospects of new classes of state troopers driving safe cars, reliable cars? Can we be shocked over funding for rapid AIDS tests and drugs that will help those who live with AIDS and HIV stay alive? Are we appalled by the efforts to keep our families safe through homeland security measures for the state and local governments? Mr. Speaker, I am at a loss here. I do not find any of these things shocking or appalling. What should shock us? What should appall us? What should make our blood boil? Is that these things were not routinely a part of this state's annual spending plan. Imagine the wealthiest state in the nation, during its greatest financial success in the state and our nation's history, never funded these programs, turning their back on the people of this state and the opportunity to provide that relief. We've heard today, it's one thing to do these programs when there's money. It's another when there is no money. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't fund these programs when we are flush with cash, when revenues exceed the cost of programs, and we don't rely on the dollars of this state at that most crucial time, when economics suffer, when businesses suffer, when people suffer, who suffers more than the poor? What better time than when money is short to address the needs of this state? Ladies and gentlemen, what should shock us is that we live in a state where 1.4 million people, working men and women and their children, have to get up each day and pray that they do not get sick because they do not have health insurance. This budget has addressed that problem. What should appall us is that so many New Jersey residents who spend every day fighting a cancer within them have to travel outside of this state to get the treatment they need. This budget addresses that concern, and it adds a new beacon of hope in Newark for the minorities of this state through the leadership of Bill Payne, that they will no longer have to travel to Newark, that they will no longer have to face a mortality rate that rivals the nation. What should make our blood boil is that in this state, a state blessed with wealth and prosperity, children are dying in their homes, abused, neglected, malnourished children. This budget has addressed that issue, and we have put $125 million into this budget so that the fears of those children are no longer there. Ladies and gentlemen, when I leave this house tonight, as many of you will, I will go home, and the first thing that I will do is I will walk into my children's bedrooms. I will look at them in their beds, surrounded by their stuffed animals. And I will see them, and I will love them, and I will cuddle with them as I do every night. And I will tell you that I also see in my mind, as I close my eyes, the picture of the children wrapped in duct tape. The pictures of the children whose skeletal bodies stood stark contrast in families of Collingswood because they were starved literally almost to death. Who would not fund this? Mr. Speaker, we are going to hear a lot of numbers bandied about today. But when I see the pictures of those children and I visualize my children, I realize how blessed I truly am. And I realize that as blessed as I am, I can give more and I can do more and we should do more. And those of us who are unwilling to do more should be ashamed, should be shocked, and should be appalled. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are spending more. This budget is up 13%, 15%, 17%. I heard Mr. Blees say capping spending is politically correct. But isn't attacking increased spending also politically expedient? We'll get back to that later. Whatever percent you choose, whatever you construe, any of the numbers you choose to show, it is true, this budget is up. It is up a lot. Some figures show it is up almost 17% compared to the 04 budget as signed, 13.5% compared to the latest estimates of the final 04 spending. I know that you are shocked. I know that you're appalled. We also hear how much of the revenue is being borrowed. $1.9 billion. We all read the Senate Republican spokesperson's comments, and I quote, "We want to stop these bonds from being sold." Of course. We read the list of $1.9 billion in spending that everyone wants stopped. But I've sat here all day, now almost 10 hours. I have yet to hear the person say, don't spend money on homestead rebates. No one has said PAD should go. No one has uttered the slightest hint that the hospital funding for the neediest of this state should be eliminated. It should be cut. Or that the money that this legislature and the Democratic Party put back in the budget, $47 million worth of federal match for nursing homes, should be eliminated. And it's unlikely that anyone will. It's all part of this annual budget dance. The minority throws grenades at any objectionable part of the budget while telling every constituency they serve, we're really with you. We would never cut your budget. We'll vote for the charity care funding formula change because we're about giving you more money. But really, ladies and gentlemen, that's just fiction. Because those of us who do this every day understand that voting for a bill without the dollars to back it up puts no more money into those hospitals, provides not one more bit of coverage for working families. You know, I support your funding, but I just can't vote for a budget that spends so much, borrows too much, doesn't cut enough. Fill in the blank any way you choose. I support charity care, health coverage for working families, COLA for providers. I support rebates for 3 million families, anywhere from 50 to 100% increase. It's the best of both worlds. It's not a tale of two cities. No, it's the best of both worlds. You get to say you're everyone's friend without having to make any actual commitment. You have no tough decisions, no Hobson's choices, no sleepless nights, no visions of children wrapped in duct tape, no visions of skeletal children searching trash cans in your communities, in neighborhoods and suburbs like Collingswood. It's interesting that there's money to hire lawyers to start tomorrow to challenge the bonding of this budget. But there was no money, apparently, to hire former treasurers, experts to analyze the budget and outline the $1.9 billion in cuts. Mr. Speaker, throughout the past few months and continuing today, we have heard much about taxes. There go those tax and spend Democrats. They're destroying the economy, driving people out of the state. Well, Mr. Speaker, we know we're not driving people out of the state. We know that someone making $550,000 will not uproot their family because today they pay $30,500 and tomorrow they'll pay $32,000. They won't rip their children from their schools. They won't pull up stakes in their businesses. They won't leave their families. They won't sell their million-dollar mansions and tear away from the family memories of pulling their wife and taking her into their home for the first time, bringing their children home from the hospital, celebrating birthdays and holidays. People don't do that. Well, Mr. Speaker, we know we're not driving these people out. That's why this budget does not contain a petrochemical fee, because we recognize the Bush gas tax is already far too high. There are tax increases funding this budget. We are putting an assessment on elective cosmetic surgery. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard that we are taxing everyone in this state. I'm not selling my home this year. I won't pay that tax. I've not had cosmetic surgery. I'm not paying that tax. I don't own an ambulatory center. I'm not paying that tax. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that if I was going to have a cosmetic procedure that was elective, I would be more than happy to pay a little more so that the child of a working class family could get emergency health care. There's a cigarette tax increase. Yes, there is. I do not smoke. But if I did, I would pay more knowing that New Jersey would have a world-class cancer center. There's a tire fee. Yes, I know. And sometimes I've bought new tires, as I have recently. They will last me 5 years. It will cost me about $1.20 a year. It is important to know that that money will be there so that this year, as in the supplemental budget, we've had to put $12 million in for unexpected snow. There's a phone assessment. Yes, there is. I have no problem paying $11 a year so that if my wife and my children are on the road and have a problem, emergency personnel will find them. There's a realty transfer fee increase. If you sell your home, only if you sell your home, and that home is worth more than $350,000, you will pay a little bit more. I believe that is fair so that those who need affordable housing can have and share in the dream, the American dream. Mr. Speaker, there will be much debate today, and everyone will couch this budget in terms of what they believe is the bottom line. For many, the bottom line will be $28 million. That's all they will see. That's all they will ever see. But the real bottom line of this spending plan is this investment in the people of this state. It invests in our education. It invests in our safety net hospitals. It invests in our health clinics. It invests in child safety. It invests in municipalities. It invests in property taxes. It invests in seniors. It invests in better roads and bridges. It invests in more jobs and new economic development opportunities. It seizes on the fiscal restraint that we exercised over the past couple of years. We are seeing the return of our investment. We are seeing the return of our labors. It is a better future for all of us. Is it shocking? Is it appalling? No, Mr. Speaker. It is common sense. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the bill.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblywoman Watson Coleman, Chair of the Appropriations Committee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll tell you, I'm a little tired just listening from all the energy that Assemblyman Chairman Greenwald has just shared with this body. First, let me thank him and let me tell him what a pleasure and an honor it is to work with him and to work with Assemblyman Payne, who are the leaders of this committee. And let me thank also each and every one of our members, our Democratic members and our Republican colleagues, because we all worked very hard and we all listened very hard and we all learned something, and we also learned a little something about each other. And we couldn't have done any of this, Mr. Speaker, without the good work, the dedication, the knowledge, and the commitment of a really great staff on our side, of course, and a great staff on my colleague's side across the aisle. I'm really proud to stand here today alongside of my distinguished colleagues, the Budget Chairman and every other member, as we pass a fiscal measure that reflects the priorities of New Jersey families. Since February, our committee and caucus leadership have worked tirelessly to ensure that this budget document meets the needs of hardworking New Jerseyans. We have heard from residents in every corner of the state. We have listened to every advocacy group and interested party. We have entertained every available option to do the best we can on behalf of the people of this state. Mr. Speaker, the result is a budget that we can be proud of, a plan that is both fiscally and socially responsible. Whether it's increased resources for property tax relief, health care, or education, this budget addresses the top priorities of the New Jersey residents. New Jerseyans have cried out for change in the property tax system. This budget delivers new levels of property tax relief, simply as a down payment while we work toward long-term systemic reforms. Not only do we provide record amounts of municipal and school aid, but we are encouraging more shared services while holding the line on unnecessary school and municipal budget growth. Thanks to the foresight of our Speaker and the cooperation of our Governor and this legislature, we also are about to streamline property tax rebate programs and provide increased rebates to senior citizens, working families, and yes, Mr. Speaker, even our tenants. These rebates, coupled with new cost containments for municipalities and schools, will serve as a bridge as we strive to achieve reform through a citizen-empowered constitutional convention. We didn't stop at property tax relief with this budget. In crafting this fiscal plan, we also sought to address another primary concern of New Jersey residents, unimpeded access to quality health care. The bill before you this evening provides greater access to health care for working families unable to afford health care by increasing funding for hospitals by $200 million. This investment not only will provide a safety net of care for 1.4 million uninsured New Jerseyans, but it will reverse a recent trend of hospital shutdowns and service cutbacks. We also enhanced our commitment to cancer research by increasing our investment in the state's Cancer Institute for New Jersey. This will enable thousands of cancer patients to receive care in-state rather than traveling to New York or Pennsylvania. Likewise, we have dedicated $3 million to create 6 stroke centers in the state, and we have courageously appropriated funds for the promising cure potential of stem cell research. New Jersey has some of the greatest scientists and researchers in the nation. This budget will help them break new ground and fully realize their goals of making new discoveries that can save human lives. This budget also helps New Jersey families by investing in education opportunities for children. We are providing more support for our institutions of higher education, both county colleges and four-year schools. This will ensure that our young people can attain first-rate college educations in their own backyard. Whether it's through the County College Scholarship, New Jersey STARS program that you sponsored, Mr. Speaker, additional capacity at colleges, or increased tuition assistance, we want our students to be able to succeed without having to leave their state. We were able to deliver all of this thanks to the difficult decisions we have made during the past 2 budget cycles. We put the state on sound fiscal ground and instituted policies that help New Jersey's economy flourish. Our efforts are paying off, and New Jerseyans across the state will benefit. Years from now, we will be able to look back at this budget and be proud of all the good things it did for the residents of this great state. When a STAR scholarship recipient goes on to lead a Fortune 500 company here in New Jersey, or stem cell researchers find a cure for Alzheimer's disease, or seniors can finally afford their property taxes, we will then know it all began right here. I urge all of my colleagues, all of my members, all of my friends to please support this budget. Let's be proud of what we've been able to deliver for the people of New Jersey. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Assemblyman Payne, Vice Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to add my voice in support of this budget. I have had the privilege to work on constructing this fiscal plan over the past 4 months, traveling to various parts of our great state to hear the concerns of citizens from all walks of life. And I'm extremely proud of the document that we have produced. With this budget, this state can provide a new safety net to protect the most vulnerable residents of this state. With this budget, we can make up for decades of our shameful failure on the behalf of the working poor people in need of hospital care, for children in need of protection from abuse, and for families with loved ones in need of mental health services. With this budget, we turn the corner toward a genuine economic recovery, one in which we make a concerted effort to channel the dividends of increased revenue collections into an improved quality of life for all of our citizens. Mr. Speaker, roughly 27% of the spending increases in this budget are earmarked for improving health care and child protection. This budget will provide $80 million in cost of living increases for health care community provider workers, which is long overdue. This budget also will provide $66 million more for developmentally disabled group homes, veterans nursing homes, early childhood intervention, and other social services and mental health programs. Mr. Speaker, I'm especially proud of additional funding this budget will provide for a network of nonprofit agencies that contract with the state to provide mental health services in our communities. Mr. Speaker, over the past 5 years, the dedicated men and women who work in this field of mental health have seen a total funding increase of 6% over the past 5 years. During the recent 2001-2002 recession, these men and women patiently sacrificed so the state could weather a crisis of declining revenue collections. This year, with the prospects of better times now at hand, we have the opportunity to use this budget to say thank you to these people for providing them with a guaranteed 3.5% funding increase. This budget goes a step further by giving the State Commissioner of Human Services the authority to increase this funding up to a total 4% if the money is found to be available. This cost of living adjustment is well deserved for the people who work in our communities to treat patients suffering with mental illnesses. With the phasing out of antiquated state psychiatric institutions, these hard-working professionals in the mental health field have helped thousands of people all across this state. This funding increase will help avert a crisis in our state's community mental health treatment system and ensure the uninterrupted delivery of quality care for people suffering from mental illness. Mr. Speaker, there is another important aspect of the budget I would like to highlight the $125 million in additional support for Division of Youth and Family Services reform. This funding increase constitutes a new day for New Jersey children at risk of abuse, neglect, and maltreatment. This money will help this long-troubled agency to alleviate a crushing caseload. It will trigger a better response on the part of this state for the 60,000 children currently under DYFS supervision. It will also enable the state to follow through on an initiative that Assemblywoman Mary Previty and I have long crusaded for continuation of DYFS services for children aging out of foster care or DYFS custody. This is critically needed for children who are in DYFS custody at age 18 and need additional support so they can transition into life as independent and productive adults. So these young people, ill-prepared, vulnerable children, will not be thrust on the streets to be victimized by a cruel world, to become homeless, and to become what is called couch surfers, friendless and ill-prepared for life on their own. This funding will help provide a bridge of support for these young people up to the age of 21 and prepare them to assume positive roles in the adult world. The DYFS funding increase also will help insulate this state from the shame of child abuse fatalities that we have had to endure over the past 2 years. One of these highly publicized cases occurred last year in my own legislative district, when the lifeless body of young Fahim Williams was found with his starving brothers, Raheem and Tyrone, in the squalid, dark basement of a Newark apartment. This case affected me to my soul and sent pangs of sorrow to my heart, for this tiny child was a victim of an inept and ineffective welfare system. This case shook the nation and alerted us to the need to do more to protect young, vulnerable children from danger. With this budget, we give meaning to the short life of Fahim Williams by infusing our state's child protection network with a new measure of resources to fight abuse and neglect. Mr. Speaker, this budget not only takes a stand on behalf of residents who need help the most, but it also provides new levels of support for all New Jersey families. It provides $159 million to keep college tuitions affordable through increased investments in higher education, student financial aid, and the new New Jersey STARS scholarship program. It provides $455 million to replace nursing home aid that was cut by the federal government. And it provides $585 million to guarantee health care access for working families that don't have health insurance. Mr. Speaker, this budget makes unprecedented investments in children, health care, and programs that help senior citizens and working families. Because of the wealth of benefits that this budget will provide to all of New Jersey's families, I consider it to be prudent and sound, and I wholeheartedly urge its passage. Thank you.
Assemblyman Long. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Before I start my remarks, I would very much like to thank all of the staff members on both sides of the aisle, Beth Schermerhorn and Christine Pastor from the Republican staff, Mayor Messenger and Andrew Henry, the Democratic staff, and the dedicated work of OLS. These are the individuals who do the lion's share of the work and seldom get the credit. I would like to also thank the members of the Budget Committee for their long hours, patience, and understanding of a wide range of issues and concerns. Republican members Frank Lee, Kevin O'Toole, Allison McHose, our Democratic colleagues Vice Chair Bill Payne, Bonnie Watson-Coleman, Linda Greenstein, Joe Cryan, Joan Quigley, and Joe Voss. I immensely respect each and every one of you. And more particularly, Chairman Lou Greenwald, who has spent countless hours on very difficult issues. He deserves a lot of credit and our respect for his hard work. Before I continue, I was somewhat taken by Assemblyman Greenwald's comments. I have often talked to him about his children. I look at Allison McHose, who has 2 small children, whose husband has left to go serve this country. I think of Frank Blee and his 2 children and his wishes and desires to be with them on days that were in committees. He wishes he could be with his kids in softball. Kevin O'Toole, who has to take his 2 small children to daycare every day before he comes down here. We are not looking at this budget with a jaundiced eye towards helping mankind in this state. And I think to sort of portray us in a fashion that is less than kind or concerned is something I hope to dispel this evening. And we do have some genuine concerns, Mr. Speaker. This year's budget reminds me of the way Charles Dickens began his book, Tale of Two Cities. It's the best of times and the worst of times. How will people look back at all of us for what we did during this last few years? Democrats have repeatedly cried out about huge deficits, belt-tightening, living within your means, putting caps on spending, and what did it all produce? A 17% increase in the 05 budget, billions of dollars in borrowing for operating expenses, billions of dollars in new and increased taxes over the last 2 years, and I'm not even talking about the $700 or $800 million for the millionaire's tax. Colleagues, this budget, which is over $28 billion, is frightening. It stands for a big government out of control. It stands for everything people believe is wrong with government, lack of integrity of what we say in campaigns and what we do after elections. After all has been said by the Democrats over the last 2.5 years about past spending, you are on the brink of approving the largest state budget increase in the history of New Jersey, using only a credit card. This is being said as you tell municipalities and school districts to limit their spending to 2.5%. Can anyone tell me how to justify this thought process? You, the Democrats, will argue we are spending money on good causes, and you may be right. But there are just as many good causes that are not being funded. Why stop at 17%? Why not 20% or 25%? Let's take care of all the good causes. Schools, healthcare workers, environment, transportation trust fund, and so on. This budget sets the course for disaster. I may not be in the legislature when it happens, but in the years to come, property tax, income tax, and sales tax will most certainly skyrocket. Chairman Greenwald has been a good warrior, and I hope he is not judged over the course of time as the man who sponsored the largest budget increase in the history of the state of New Jersey. My Republican colleagues will more precisely talk about aspects of this budget as we go through this evening. But let me assure you that this budget will be talked about for long after we leave tonight. What has puzzled many that I have spoken to is the drastic increase in the budget over the one presented by the governor in his budget message earlier this year. Why is this budget so much greater, and what happened to the budget deficit? This budget is really creative. We spend $4 billion more to cut a $4 billion deficit. What does this budget mean to the average New Jerseyan? It means you will pay $500 to $1,500 more per year in new taxes, fees, or increased property taxes. It means after all of the dust settles and the rhetoric fades, residents will reach into their pockets and open the checkbooks and pay more this year than last. And it's not the millionaires who will really hurt. The increase in this budget will reach down and grab the throat of every person in this state. Make no mistake, low and moderate income people will pay dearly for what we've done tonight. Democrats say, well, what would you cut? Tell me where. It's unrealistic to ask that question when department after department could not or would not give straight answers as to their spending aspects in the budget. Let me give you a few examples. Just the other evening when we discussed the tobacco tax borrowing, the lack of answers by Treasury and the Bond Council. The professionals could not give answers as to real cost, length of bonds, or legal or financial costs. It is estimated that the new borrowing of $1.9 billion could cost $7 to $10 billion, depending on rates and maturity dates. Department of Personnel. State employee counts could not be definitely defined. Department of Education spending with all aspects of Abbott and non-Abbott schools were not clearly defined. Department of Commerce, TV ads, promotional activities. I had no real idea of the costs, and the hearings went on with basically the same results from most of the departments. Maybe I'm wrong. People do want to pay higher taxes. People don't care if it costs $400 more to buy a new car because the state has increased fees or taxes. Doesn't make any difference if it costs $7.50 more to buy a set of tires. Maybe I'm wrong. People don't mind if the state seizes their bank accounts or looks into the possibility of taking unused gift cards or charges a fee if you go to an outpatient clinic. I guess I'm wrong. People want to pay an extra $1 a month per phone or fax or computer. I guess I'm wrong. People want to pay higher fees when they sell their home. Friends on both sides of the aisle, this budget is wrong. Not because it does many bad things. It does some very good things. Deep down inside, most of you know this budget is a budget we cannot afford. Most of you would not take the risk in your own personal lives that you're asking the residents of the state to risk in this budget tonight. If you are wrong in the risk you are taking, the pain on the state and its residents that may be inflicted because of this budget will make the last few years insignificant. The silence of the majority is deafening. I believe most Democrats in this room are as shocked as the rest of in the state at the size of this budget. So is it the best of times or the worst of times? Each of you must answer the question in your own mind. I truly believe that all of you are hard-working, honest people, and none of you want to risk anyone's future. Please do not pass a budget that is nearly $4 billion more than last year. Who will pay the bill when it becomes due? I consider myself to be moderate and socially conscious of what our obligations are in government, but everyone has to be and put themselves in a context of what we can afford. I've been in elected office since I was 23 as a mayor and a legislator over a period of 31 years. Nothing has scared me more than the long-term effects of the amount of this budget and how it will be funded. God help all of us for what will happen tonight. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Assemblywoman Greenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to speak in support of all the work my colleagues on the Budget Committee put into this document. I want to commend Chairman Greenwald and all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, as well as our great staff. Mr. Speaker, this is in many ways a good time for the property taxpayers of New Jersey. That is because our state is in the fortuitous position to give more to help rein in upwardly spiraling property tax rates. Our economy is gaining strength every day. Our unemployment is going down. More new businesses than ever before are springing up, and the confidence of our residents is coming back. All the signs of recovery are there, and it only follows that this state must use this rising tide to lift the boats of the taxpayers of this state. After 2 years of belt-tightening, we're now in a position to lessen the weight our towns and schools placed upon the shoulders of our residents in the form of higher property taxes. Last week, this chamber took the courageous first step towards reforming our property tax system by passing significant property tax relief. Through our passage of the FAIR Plan, this budget will provide the means to provide greater than ever property tax relief to our residents. It includes $2.2 billion in direct property tax relief to middle and lower income households who need it most. That's over a 50% increase from last year. Soon, more than 2 million New Jersey homeowners and an additional 1 million renters will receive increased rebate checks. From seniors on a fixed income to the average homeowner who's seen his property tax rise faster than income, this is real substantial relief. Mr. Speaker, this budget contains the greatest amount of aid for our towns and schools than any previous budget. The budget will provide our schools and municipalities with $824 million in increased state aid, giving those bodies a chance to fund their programs without having to ask the property taxpayer to give more. That is a tangible benefit that will be felt by millions of New Jersey residents. I am willing and proud to support this budget because I know it will make life better for the people of my district. I know that when I walk into the senior center in Monroe Township, I will be able to talk with the people there about how the FAIR Plan helped give them a $1,200 property tax rebate, allowing them to continue to live in the town they love. When I travel to Hamilton, I know I will be able to walk into any school and see the benefit of more than $1 million in high expectations for learning proficiency aid that the township schools will receive under this budget, and that will allow important programs to continue without having to increase property taxes. And when I travel to South Brunswick, where the school enrollment will grow by nearly 5% in the coming year, the $300,000 in high-growth district aid that the schools there will receive under this budget will allow them to meet the challenge of growing class size without having to increase property taxes. Mr. Speaker, this is not a perfect budget, and such a thing does not exist. But I also know that the people of New Jersey are clamoring for us to help get them out from underneath the crushing weight of their property tax bills. This budget is the rope and pulley with which we can lift that weight. I urge my colleagues to think outside of the politics and rhetoric and to give to their constituents the property tax relief that they're asking for. I know that in voting for this budget, I'll be able to look my constituents squarely in the eye and tell them that I helped deliver the relief that they craved. And I hope that all my colleagues will do the same. Thank you.
Assemblyman Bleak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a number of years ago, when your predecessor, Speaker Collins, was at the podium, I rose one night to speak on the budget, and I said I had always adhered to a philosophy, speak only if it's an improvement upon silence. And I've always tried to stick to that philosophy and only rise when I had something to say. But sincerely, when I rise to speak on legislation, it does come from the heart, and hopefully it's meaningful in this debate. Mr. Speaker, I rise tonight to oppose this budget and this plan for a number of reasons. Most importantly, I oppose the spending in this budget, the bonding, and all the new taxes. Mr. Speaker, if we look at the spending plan that we are considering tonight, $28.2 billion is the largest budget in history. It's the largest spending increase in terms of dollars, $4 billion. And 17% increase is the largest increase in state history. So this budget, this vote tonight is of historic proportions. However, I don't know that we all agree that it's going in the right direction, that this is the type of positive impact we'd like to have on history. Mr. Speaker, if we look at the deficit bonding that's in the budget tonight, $1.9 billion in bonding for operating expenses. This is akin to buying the groceries on the credit card. But something to think about is the fact that 1 year from now, that $1.9 billion will have been spent. When we come back here next year to argue the budget, that $1.9 billion will be gone. However, our obligation to pay that off will be for 40 years. So I know bonding has been a very hot topic in debate over the years. Democrats have done it, Republicans have done it, and depending whether you're in the majority or the minority, you're either for the bonding or against the bonding. But what I find unique about the bonding this year is normally when you oppose bonding, you say, we are passing on debt to our children. But with this unprecedented $1.9 billion deficit bond, we're spreading it over 40 years. So we're not passing this on to just our children. This bond is being passed on to our grandchildren. And that's something I think we should all consider before we cast our vote. When we talk about taxes, this has $1.6 billion in new taxes, and I believe taxes that truly affect the middle class and the working poor disproportionately. Tonight, when we cast our vote for this budget, we will be casting a vote to tax phones. We'll be increasing the cigarette tax. We'll be increasing the motor vehicle registration tax. We'll be taxing new tire purchases. We will increase the realty transfer tax. We'll be taxing sales on the homes valued in excess of $1 million. Now, does that really affect the person who can afford $1 million home? No, but if it drives off sales, the real estate agent who's trying to make ends meet will be adversely affected. Tonight we're taxing, or we're adding a surcharge on unsafe driving. We are not fulfilling our obligation on deductibility of net operating losses. We are disallowing the depreciation deduction. We are taxing transitional energy facilities assessment. We are taxing the New Jersey Spill Compensation Fund. We're taxing billboards. There's an air emissions tax. We're taxing medical care, particularly ambulatory care. We're taxing an assessment to HMOs, and we are imposing a sales tax on cosmetic procedures, actually taxing medical procedures for the first time. When you total all those taxes, it adds up to $1.6 billion, again, a staggering amount of new taxes. One of the things that I found interesting as a member of the Budget Committee was when Treasurer McCormick appeared to the committee at the end of May. And at that time, the day before, the Treasurer had let the press know that because revenues had increased, we were actually going to be up in about between $700 and $800 million in new revenue estimates, new revenue forecasts that had not been there in March. But as it set the tone for our budget deliberations in the important month of June, before the Treasurer ever appeared before our committee with this newfound $800 million, it somehow was termed a windfall, and literally before the Treasurer appeared before our committee, all $800 million was spent. There was no consideration to maybe reducing the deficit bond. There was no consideration to reduce any of the taxes. And that's something that I think everyone on the committee found somewhat disturbing. Mr. Speaker, another thing that I found disturbing was the process. The process as we put this budget together, particularly the last few days. As a member of the Budget Committee, between Tuesday and Wednesday, we considered around 42 or 43 bills. Many of them were new pieces of legislation. I got to really know what the old saying of hot off the press really meant, because many times the bills that we held in our hand were warm because they had just come off the copy machine, because they had just been crafted. And again, if you look at the process, if we were truly to be involved, if we were not trying to speed the process along, how can there be meaningful debate and dialogue? How can there be public input? How can there be thoughtful deliberations, not just from the majority party, but hopefully thoughtful insight from the minority party when we were literally looking at these bills and voting at the same time? In fact, one of the newspapers has recently referred to this process as blinding speed in Trenton. And as you know, legislators are not always accused of blinding speed. Mr. Speaker, as I commented earlier this evening when I spoke on the school cap bill, I think I've always been respectful of members of both sides of the aisles, and I certainly believe that I have dear friends on both sides of the aisles, and that's because I think I respect the rights of each and every person in this chamber, and I've always tried to keep the rhetoric to a minimum. And I'm going to continue to do that tonight, Mr. Speaker. I think I've always considered myself one of the more moderate members of our caucus. Maybe not true Republican vote casting, but just this past week and a half, I voted in favor of the Highlands bill, which wasn't a real winner in the Republican caucus. On Monday, I cast a vote for the millionaires tax. So I'm lucky that I wasn't thrown out because of some of my votes. But I think I show a spirit of independence, I show a spirit of moderation, and someone who stayed away from rhetoric. And, Mr. Speaker, I will not engage in any divisive or abrasive rhetoric tonight on this budget. But I will quote from a few individuals who've made comment about the budget. And in the last few days, the Star Ledger has said about this budget, say no to a spending spree. A $3.946 billion budget hike just can't be justified. This morning, the Press of Atlantic City said in bold headlines, fiscally irresponsible. New Jersey lawmakers are poised to adopt what may be the most fiscally responsible state budget in recent history. And regular readers know how just stiff that competition is. The Atlantic City Press calls the proposed new debt is not just unconscionable, it may well be unconstitutional. And Mr. Speaker, the record actually today states, thank God for the Republicans. Now, I don't know that I've ever heard thank God for the Republicans in our own caucus, Mr. Speaker, and now all of a sudden we have an editorial board saying thank God for the Republicans. So there are some strange goings on this evening in our state capitol surrounding this budget. Mr. Speaker, as you know, when we leave this chamber tonight, ultimately we go back to our own districts. And that's when we really have to look our constituents in the eye, and that's when I think reality will begin to set in for each and every member of the chamber. As I said, the rhetoric will fly certainly past 12:01 this evening. But when I go back to my district and I look working class people in the eye who maybe are thrilled to death that they are able to get a 3% cost of living increase this year, maybe some have been held flat, but modest increases in their income, and I have to look them in the eye and say that I just came back from Trenton, the state capital, where the Assembly and the Senate passed a budget that went up 17% in 1 year. It's going to be very hard for working class people to understand how we can do this. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to have to go back home and look municipal elected officials and county elected officials in the eye and say, we capped your spending while at the same time we voted a 17% increase in our state spending. I'm going to have to look school districts in the eye and elected officials from school districts who have been shortchanged in state funding for enrollment growth, yet we had the wisdom to cap them at 2.5% while we're spending 17%. So these are all tasks, these are all things that we're going to have to do when we go back tomorrow and look our constituents in the eye. And was stated earlier, Mr. Speaker, what I find most disturbing about this budget is my predecessors mentioned, I have two daughters. I have children, so I know what it's like to be a parent. I know what it's like to raise children, hopefully raise them responsibly. I have to go and look my own children in the eye, Mr. Speaker, and as we tell our children, as we try and teach our children, that most importantly, you always have to show restraint. You always have to think about tomorrow. I have to return and tell them that a budget passed in the state capitol that clearly says, the heck with tomorrow, live for today. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm really disheartened that when we leave here tonight as legislators, when we leave here as statesmen, and ultimately return to our districts where we were elected, how will we ever look our people in the eye and say, you have to practice fiscal restraint? I think tonight we're passing a budget that says, do what you have to, get it done, but I think all in all, when you look at this budget, this is wrong for New Jersey. It will have a profound effect on our future in ensuing years, and it's a budget that I am opposed to, and I would urge all my colleagues to vote no on this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Assemblyman O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin my comments, let me first commend Budget Chairman, Assemblyman Louis Greenwald. The budget process, by its very nature, is long and arduous and difficult, and Chairman Greenwald throughout was fair, informed, and accommodating. And I want to thank Lou for his leadership, and like all my colleagues on the Budget Committee, is a credit to this wonderful institution we call the New Jersey State Assembly. Mr. Speaker, on the bill.
On the bill.
Mr. Speaker, each one of us come from different parts of the state with different backgrounds, different priorities, and yes, different influences. While we may agree on many issues, we certainly disagree on some. Regardless of where we come from or who we are, I believe that we all appreciate the responsibility of serving as state legislators. We, those of us in this room, couldn't be more fortunate. We have a job to do. And one of the paramount concerns or priorities with our job comes the responsibility of adopting a state budget for all 8.4 million residents of New Jersey. Senior citizens, the needy, our children, the wealthy, the poor, the middle class, the haves, the have-nots. We are responsible for them all. And given our charge, I'd like to believe that no one member has a monopoly on compassion for these groups. I'd like to believe we all have this well of compassion for all the people of New Jersey. Concerning our state budget, A3100, this document, this represents the state budget for fiscal year 2005. So as part of my duties as a Budget Committee member and one of the 80 sitting in this room, it is my obligation to talk about the priorities of this budget, what it represents and what it doesn't, what it does and what it fails to do. As I was reviewing the boxes of documents and my notes from the many budget hearings, I came across testimony of our Secretary of State, Regina Tots. On April 15, 2004, she came to testify before our committee. And the very first statement that she made was, and I quote, "What a difference a year makes." Now bear in mind, Madam Secretary was happy, near exuberant. For this year stood in sharp contrast to her tumultuous year when she had terrific budget shortfall in the year past. As she declared what a difference a year makes, I didn't fully appreciate the timely nature of her statement. But the Secretary of State was on to something. Indeed, what a difference a year makes. This year, as we have heard, we are on the verge of passing a $28 billion budget. Without partisan hyperbole or Trenton-imbued jadedness, it is hard to fathom that this year we're even talking about a record $28 billion budget. 1 year ago, we passed a $24 billion budget. Today, we are talking about a $4 billion increase, a once unimaginable $4 billion increase. This increase represents an unprecedented and unheard of 17% increase in state spending over last year. The question is, how did we get here? How are we going to pay for this budget? Let's look at some of the funding mechanisms. This budget relies upon $1.6 billion in new taxes. As an aside, with these tax increases, it now brings the grand total of new taxes under three McGreevey budgets to a total of $4.4 billion. Equally alarming in this budget, it relies upon $1.9 billion in new bonding. I note that with this new bonding, it brings the grand total of bonding in the three McGreevey budgets to over $10 billion. Let's talk about this bonding. For $1.9 billion, you would think that a year from now, we would be able to point to bridges rebuilt, roads repaired, schools constructed, or open space preserved, or some other long-term monument of traditional state government bonding. No, a year from now, we will have nothing to show except decades worth of repayment receipts for those bonding notes. For the $1.9 billion bonding is to be used for this year's operating expenses. There is something wrong with that. There is something very, very wrong with that. Something doesn't sit right. The Wall Street analysts call it unwise and deficit financing. Some constitutional scholars opine that this type of bonding for operating expenses is unconstitutional. More importantly, the Office of Legislative Services has released a detailed opinion stating that this bonding is in fact unconstitutional. This bonding violates not only one provision of our state constitution, but it violates two clauses of our state constitution. The constitutionality of this bonding will apparently be resolved in court. Regardless, the use of nearly $2 billion in bonds to be used for this fiscal year, while being structured to be paid off in 20 to 40 years, offends me. Offends me as a legislator. It should offend every legislator. As I mentioned before, for in 2045, if these bonds are carried to their maturity, the state of New Jersey will be paying off the last year of these bonds, whose proceeds were used 4 decades earlier to pay for office supplies, staff, and other operating expenses for a single year. That does not seem right. New Jersey deserves better. Besides the bonding, this budget relies upon 17 new taxes, totaling $1.6 billion. Since the introduction of this budget, we have heard that we have to live within our means. We have heard no increase in the sales tax, no increase in the income tax, no more bonding. Now we see a $28 billion budget, a $4 billion increase, $1.9 billion in bonding, 17% increase in state spending, an increase in the income tax, an increase in the sales tax. This state is not living within its means. This state is living beyond its means. It is hypocritical for this body to ask municipalities, boards of education, and counties to live within a 2.5% cap, when in fact the state spending is 7 times that cap level. Where is the spending cap for state spending? Let's talk about the surplus. In years past, the surplus is over $1 billion. Today, it is budgeted at $400 million. But due to a $160 million recently court-modified Abbott spending decision, it should drop that surplus to a precarious $240 million. That appears to be unwise. Mr. Speaker, from where I come from, in Cedar Grove, in Essex County, I, like many of us, represent hard-working people, many working, middle-class folks, trying to live paycheck to paycheck. In my hometown, day to day, I see people who I grew up with. They are struggling to make ends meet. Many households have 2 parents working while balancing careers and parenthood alike. I see parents, real people, worrying about paying their taxes, trying to save for college costs, and hoping beyond hope that something will be left over for retirement. They are trying to live within their means. I see grandparents each and every day, parents of my generation, having to make hard decisions on fixed incomes. They don't want to move out because the love of their family and their grandchildren is too great. Yet property taxes, health care costs, and the cost of living in this Garden State is rapidly growing too expensive. The sad reality is that we are forcing a generation to leave this state, to go to Delaware or South Carolina or Florida, where the cost of living is just plain cheaper. But the price of this forced separation from one's family is simply inhumane. This is a sad commentary on our society, sad commentary on where we are as a society. This state government is spending too much, taxing too much, bonding too much, and costing the average citizen too much. New Jersey deserves better.